Yaakov. Yishlach Ezecha Mikodesh Mitzir Yisadecha. Yizkar Kolman Chesecha Ve'eloscha Dashna Sela. Iten Lechachel Vabecha V'chol Atzoscha Yamale. V'ranana B'shuasecha V'Shem Eloheinu Nidger. Yamale Adonai Kol Mishalei Secha. Ato Yodaitik Yeshia Adonai Mashiach. Yaneu Mishmei Kodshet. Begures Yesha Yeminan. Eile Barechev, Veile Vasusim. Anachnu B'Shem Adonai Eloheinu Nazkir. Hema Kvaru V'Nafolu. Anachnu Kamnu V'Naseilu. Adonai Yeshia Amelech Yaneinu V'Yem Kareni. So before we start the mimer on Surah Saima, where are all the copies? Over here. Mimer we're going to do. I just want to conclude with two things after learning the mimer of Hilchotzu, which is all about Ahavas Yisrael. Two things that are found in the Sichos about Ahavas Yisrael. It brings out how amazing Ahavas Yisrael is. One of them is a story that the Friedrich Rebbe told the story. He also writes it in a letter. In many Sidurim, it's printed in the back. But the story is that one of the greatest Talmidim, the Mezritcha Magid, later he became a big Rebbe himself, was someone who was called Menachem Mendel of Horodok. Sometimes they say Menachem Mendel of Vitebsk, because he was in both places. And actually the name that the Tzemach Tzedek has, which is Menachem Mendel, is the name after him. And the Rebbe's name is after the Tzemach Tzedek, and all Menachem Mendel and Lubavitch come from that. So not only was he one of the great Talmidim of the Maggid, but after the Maggid's passing, because he was one of the senior Talmidim, a lot of the other students took him upon themselves as a Rebbe, including the Alter Rebbe himself. Consulted with him, he wrote to him for brachas, and this story is that this is, I think, during the time of the Maggid. There was a few times a year where all the students of the Maggid would come together in his city, in his shul or his home, and they would bring together and go over different things that they heard by their Rebbe and review them and go into it in depth and discuss it. So one time when they're having one such farbrengen, somebody walked in, and burst out crying. He said that his son-in-law is very sick. The doctors say that they have no hope for him to live. And he's asking them for a bracha. So they said, we don't give brachas. Bracha, you have to go to the Rebbe. Even though we know that every Yid is capable of giving a bracha. And they too were great tzaddikim. I'm imagining it's probably because they felt that in the presence of the Maggid, it's inappropriate for them to be the one to give the bracha. Actually, in this week's Parsha, one of the reasons that are given why Nadav and Avihu had what happened to them was because they gave a halachic ruling in the presence of Moshe Rabbeinu. In other words, in the presence of Moshe Rabbeinu, you shouldn't be sort of standing out as someone that gives a halachic ruling. So probably a similar thing. They didn't want to give the bracha, and they started singing. They're singing, but he didn't stop, and he was crying, and his crying was louder than their singing. And then at one point, the Alter Rebbe stood up, and the Alter Rebbe said, "Thank you very much." No, I said, "Thank you very much." The Alter Rebbe stood up, and the Alter Rebbe said, "Have you forgotten what we heard from our Rebbe, the Maggid?" And what was it? The Alter Rebbe said that a bracha of that's given by a Chassidish Farbrengen in the atmosphere of brotherly love is greater, could accomplish more than Malach Machol. Malach Michal is one of the malachim that are mentioned in the Torah in one of the books of the Nevi'im. We know that there are infinite malachim, really, but only a few are their names mentioned because they're like the head of all the malachim. So Malach Michal is one of them, and his function is he is the advocate for the Jewish people. He's our advocate in Shemayim. There's the other angel that looks for faults. We call him the Satan, and Malach Michal is the one who was always fighting him. So the Alter Rebbe said that when Chassidim are together in an atmosphere of brotherly love and give a bracha to someone, it's greater and can accomplish more than this angel in heaven. And all the Talmidim stood up and with all their heart and soul gave him a bracha, and naturally the miracle happened and the person became well. So the Alter Rebbe gave a mashal to explain how is it that we give a bracha, ordinary people, just because we're sitting together in this atmosphere of brotherly love should accomplish so much. And Alter Rebbe said, and he gave an interesting mashal, said that children are always only concerned about themselves, very, very rarely concerned about others. And they're very particular about whatever belongs to them. They're also jealous. They want whatever the other kid has. And a lot of them just have tempers. They get angry. I think you experience all this, I'm sure. And they don't have the best midos children. And from these kind of children, little boys or little girls, the father naturally is very, very painful to him to watch, to see the child acting in such a way. So the father looks for a good educator who can educate his child and guide him to follow in the right direction. And he succeeds. And he takes a look at these same children, how they grew up, and they have love for one another, and they care for one another. And each one will run around to do whatever needs to be done to help the other one. And they don't only care about themselves. This gives the father the greatest pleasure. And he has such pleasure that when these children ask him for something, he's more than ready to do anything they ask for because of the pleasure they give him. So the Rebbe concluded that the same is with Hashem, that Hashem loves every Yid, and in some way the greatest and most painful thing for Hashem is to watch the way Chas v'Shalom Yidden don't get along with each other. And when Yidden do get along with each other, and not only that, but they care for each other, and they're blessing each other, and they're looking out for each other, this gives Hashem the greatest pleasure. And this pleasure is so powerful that as a result of that, Hashem will override anything else that's going on. So even if it's Chas v'Shalom destined that this person should Chas v'Shalom have some sort of a punishment, Hashem will cancel it and give the person the bracha that they need. This is also the answer why we say in the morning before we start davening, the Friedrich Rebbe said that at his bar mitzvah, his father said to him, "You can ask me any question you want." In fact, at my bar mitzvah, my father told me I can ask any question I want. And he told me that his bar mitzvah, his father said, "You can ask me any question you want." It goes all the way back to the Alter Rebbe. So you can imagine that a Rebbe has to choose any question he wants. Whatever he chooses must be something which is like very essential and central in his personal life. So what do the Friedrich Rebbe choose to ask? Why do we start the davening with Hareini Mekabel Olam Mitzvah Aseh Shel V'Havta L'Recha Kamecha? And the answer that he gave him was this answer, that we're going to daven, ask Hashem to fulfill our needs, and therefore before we do that, we should give Hashem pleasure, the greatest pleasure Hashem could get. We know Hashem is a king, and Hashem is a shepherd, and Hashem is a teacher, but in context of Hashem being our father, the greatest pleasure that a father could have is when he sees that his children are caring for each other and love each other and so on. So that's one thing about Ahavas Yisrael. The second thing about Ahavas Yisrael is something which we need to probably elaborate on it much more, but I'll just give it over at least the general thing of what it says. And that is the Friedrich Rebbe writes how he used to often, when the Rebbe Rashab would travel, especially when he would go away because of health reasons and needed to be away in away from the city, in a place where the air was a little bit more, I guess, easier for him physically. They would go for walks, and while they were walking, the Rebbe Rashab would talk to him and tell him different things. It was a special experience that happened when they went for walks. The Rebbe wrote a lot of different things, what his father revealed to him in these walks. So one time, one of these walks, his father spoke about one of the things that is demanded of a chassid is that before davening, while they're still wearing, as after putting on the talis and the tefillin, to sit down and meditate on the greatness of Hashem, basically to, in his mind, to think over what he studied in Chassidus, and then to start the davening. Some people do it in a few minutes, some people do it in a half hour, some people can do it for hours, everyone depending on their level. So the Rebbe Rashab spoke to him and brought out 8 different powerful benefits of this process of thinking words of Chassidus in your talis and tefillin before davening. We're just going to go over what it says. A, it refines the physical body and makes the mind, the head, and the heart a vessel for the Shekhinah. It chases away the Nefesh HaBahamis, that's 2. Third thing is it washes the Nefesh HaTivis. The 4th thing is it makes the Nefesh HaSichli, the intellectual soul, to be connected to understanding. Number 5, it lights up the whole world. Right? So if a Yid is spending time thinking about something in Chassidus while he's wearing his talis and tefillin, the whole world gets lit up. It brings godliness in all the spiritual worlds, from the highest to the lowest. The 7th thing is that it shines and it brings out the light of his nefesh, ruach, neshama, chai, and yechid, all 5 levels of the soul. And the 8th thing is mishana etzem teva medosav. Each thing needs to be explained and elaborated on separately, but one is greater than the other. And after he spoke about these 8 things, and he elaborated on them, and he explained it, what kind of an amazing effect and impact it has on the world and on the person. Then the Rebbe Rashab said the following. He said to him, he called him by his name, he said, listen, all the things I just mentioned, this whole list that I just gave you about thinking Chassidus while you're wearing talis and tefillin, and he described how this would affect an ordinary person, how this affects tzaddikim when they do it. He said all this is like insignificant compared to the Maila, the incredible Maila, if Hashem gives a person a gift, that he has pleasure in doing a favor to another Yid. After everything's said and done, it doesn't compare to having a pleasure to do a favor to another Yid. And that's obviously so. And then he goes on to explain and elaborate more on those details. Okay, we will now begin the new Maimer. So this is the Maimer from the Frierdiker Rebbe. Mentioned that there's a sefer called Sefer Maimarim Yiddish, which is very different. All Maimarim, the Rebbe said all Maimarim, all the Rabbeim, even starting from the Baal Shem Tov, their words of Chassidus were given over in Yiddish. But then they would write it. And when they wrote it in Hebrew. I think it came up more than once in this class that there was a mimer where in the mimer there was a line or a phrase or a quote in Yiddish. And that was in order that it should sort of hit home stronger. He would write it in Yiddish, which is our native language. We grew up with that, so it's closer to us. But this is different. This is the whole mimer from beginning to end is written in Yiddish. That's number 1. Number 2, what makes it unique, it was written in a very unusual time, and that is during the war, during World War II, which started in 1940 and it ended in 1945. During these 5 years, the Frierdiker Rebbe arranged that there should be a Torah journal published every month. It was called Akriya V'Hakidusha. It had different articles there, but in that journal, the Frierdiker Rebbe will put in this mimer in Yiddish. So once a month, a new mimer came out. It's not a mimer that he said, it's a mimer that he wrote. And he wrote it in Yiddish. Obviously, that it should be accessible to everybody, even people who are not so learned and don't understand English, but they'll understand Yiddish. They're Maimarim, like all Maimarim, which have a lot of deep and fundamental ideas of Chassidus. In fact, in certain ways, even more than other Maimarim, but it's written in Yiddish. So later, they took all these Maimarim from the 5 years. It was compiled into one book, and it's called Sefer Maimarim Yiddish. And in fact, I think this is the first book of Maimarim that was probably translated into English. Yeah.
This was at what point in the war?
From the beginning to the end. Started 1940 and finished 1945.
So even when he came to America?
Yeah. Oh, not even. That's when it started, after he came to America. Yeah. So, just as an introduction, there's a number of things that the Maimon is talking about. First of all, what's this idea of counting? What's the point of this mitzvah? And also, we know that what counting is really a process of refinement. So a lot of things in Torah are connected to refining the character traits. They're connected to number 7. Man puts tefillin on his arm and wraps around 7 times. We have Sukkot is 7 days. Other Yom Tovim are also 7 days because of 7 emotional attributes. Over here it's 49. Why is it 49? Another thing is, we'll also see the words inside the Chumash, it says you should count 50 days. We don't count 50, we count 49 days. So how do we know that it's 49? The Gemara says it's based on something in the Pasuk that teaches us 50 minus 1. That's strange. If it's 49, why say 50 minus 1? Just say 49. Another one of the questions he's dealing with is that the carbon, counting the Omer, a lot of people are not familiar with the fact that it's not just counting. There was a carbon that was brought on the 2nd day of Pesach. And the carbon is called carbon Omer. What does the word Omer actually mean? It doesn't mean counting. Omer is actually a measurement of barley that you're supposed to bring for this carbon. It wasn't a carbon of an animal, it was a carbon of grain. So it used barley. Generally speaking, whenever there was a carbon of grain, it was always wheat. And this was an exception. It was different. It was made out of barley. Why is it different than others? And then, of course, the general question, what's the connection between all of this with the fact that during these weeks between Pesach and Shavuos, we're also mourning the passing of Rabbi Akiva's students. So he's going to tie all this in together. Now, in this booklet, you have the beginning is the Hebrew, and after that, you have the English translation, so you can follow me in either. If I get stuck on the Hebrew word, I'll look to the English. But here it's the reverse in most cases. It was written initially, I took it from not me, but someone took it from the English and translated it to Hebrew. So this Maimon is found, initially was Yiddish, then it was translated into English, and then in Israel they translated it to Hebrew, which I think was better for us learning it. Usefartem Lachem Shabbos says in the Chumash, you should count it the day after Shabbos. From the day that you bring the Omer HaTnufa. What does Tnufa mean? Tnufa means to lift. One of the things that had to be done, part of the process of bringing this carbon, was to lift it, to bring it out, to bring it in, to bring it up, to bring it down, a little bit like we do with the lulav. That's called Tnufa. So it's the Omer means the measurement of barley, Tnufa that had to be lifted, and you have to count Sheva Shabbosos Tmimis Tiyena, 7 complete weeks. That's another question. Why is it saying Melachas Shabbos? We're going to talk about this later. This is one of the areas where there was the Tzedukim, the Tzedukim only believe in the written Torah, not in the oral Torah. In the written Torah, it says you should start counting the day after Shabbos. So they don't start counting second of Pesach. If Pesach falls out in the middle of the week, let's say it'll be on a Tuesday. Let's say this year Pesach was on Sunday, first day Pesach. So they start counting the Omer after Shabbos next week, because it says after Shabbos. If Pesach will be in the middle of the week, it's wait till after Shabbos. If Pesach comes out on Shabbos, then you start after Shabbos. So, of course, the Chachamim learn out from a pasuk that after Shabbos here doesn't mean Shabbos, it means Yom Tov. So why is it called Shabbos? They give a reason why it's called Shabbos. But it's still shocking. Why would the Torah write Shabbos? And that seems to be misleading, to the point that the Tzedukim actually didn't keep it the way you're supposed to. They did it after Shabbos. And couldn't the Torah just say, and you should count it the day after the first day Yom Tov? It would have been so much smoother and easier. And also, one of the questions are, we count the days and we count the weeks. You realize that when we count, like for example, last night you said it's 3 weeks and 3 days. You're supposed to count both. Why? But why do you need to say both? Just say it's 24th day of the Omer. Good enough. Not enough. Anyway, all this will be explained if we have a deeper understanding what the counting is all about. He starts off with another question. Yesh lahavin ma pirush hamila lachem. It says, Usefartem Lachem, you should count to you. What do you mean count to you? Just say you should count. Something similar to this we find in the Torah, the mitzvahs Esrog v'Lulav. In reference to the Esrog and the Lulav, it also says Lachem. Sham Kosov, over there it's written, Ulakachtem Lachem, and you should take to you the Harishon on the first day. But over there, the Gemara says what the word Lachem teaches us. Pirush Hamila Lachem, the meaning of the word Lachem. Why does the Torah add Lachem? It means Shetikhu Mishalachem v'lo menagezel. That it must belong to you. But if someone takes someone else's lulav and esrog without permission and makes the bracha on it, then you're not yotze the mitzvah. It has to be yours. You don't have to be the one who owns it. It's another place. Gam b'Shmini Atzeres. When it comes to Shmini Atzeres, it also says V'yema Shmini Atzeres Tiyah Lachem. We always have this good idea to see the actual pasuk inside. So if you go to the back of the booklet, let's see what these psukim are. There's numbers on the bottom of the pages, so you could see it. So number 1, page 17. That's where it says Usefartem Lachem. You should count to yourselves, count to you. What does that mean? But then he brings the other sources, which is, do we have it here? I don't think we did. Okay, but by Lulav and Esrog it says Usefartem. It says L'kachtem Lachem, and then we also have by Shmini Atzeres it says it's a day which is Yontiv Lachem to you. What does it mean by Shmini Atzeres? Shama Kavan over there it also has a purpose. Why it says Lachem? Shachag Hakabanas Shashmini Atzeres Shayachim Rak B'nei Yisrael Bilvad. That this Lachem means this day and the sacrifice on this day is exclusively for you. What does that mean? Being that the 7 days of Sukkot. Oh, you akarbonis, I will call ha'umer, Shabara Hashem Yisbarach. The purpose of the karbonis throughout Sukkot was to bring a bracha to all the nations of the world that Hashem created, not only for you. So that's what it says, that there was 70 bulls that were brought on Sukkot. The first day, 13, second day, 12, the next day, 11, 10, 9, 8. Altogether, it ended up to 70 bulls. And that was to bring the bracha to all the 70 nations. So therefore, the Torah says, and today, the 8th day of Sukkot, Masha'en came, the Shmini Atzeres, but on this 8th day, our karbonos and rak avur b'nei Yisrael b'vad. The karbonos are for the Yidden. That's why it says, Lachem, this is for you, meaning not like the other days where it included all the nations of the world. The Gemara said that if the Goyim would have known how much bracha they get from the Beis Hamikdash, from these 70 bulls on the Beis Hamikdash, not only they wouldn't destroy it, they would actually surround it with legions of soldiers to protect it. So this was the day in the year that Hashem gave bracha to all the nations of the world. But on the 8th day, Hashem said, this is only for you. Medrash, because of mashal, in fact, in the Medrash, he gave a mashal of a melech, he made a big feast for all the people of his country. Everyone's invited, and they celebrated with this feast for 7 days. After all this is over, he says to his very close friend, now that I've honored all the members of my country, Nismach and Nivata, come, me and you will celebrate together. So Hashem said to the Yidden, now that I honored all the nations of the world and I celebrated together with everyone, now let's celebrate me and you together. Karbanos Hamila Lachem shebeshmini atzeres hakarbanos shayachim l'bnei Yisrael b'vad. That's what Lachem means. So by Lulav Nesser we understand what the Lachem means. By Shmini Atzeres we understand what the Lachem means. But in the case of Sfiras Haimer, Ma Pirish Lachem. What does the word Lachem mean? Eich yitochen l'kaim as mitzvahs hasfira. How is it possible to observe the mitzvah hasfira and it wouldn't be Lachem? You count. So it means there's a possibility that it should be not Lachem, and Torah has to tell us it should be Lachem. Acha Torah tzricha lahavir shasfira ti Lachem. The Torah has to tell us that the counting is Lachem. To reinforce the question, it says, the mitzvahs lulav esrog yesh tzerich b'azhar lachem. In the other ones, the Torah has to say the word lachem to prevent us from doing something wrong. Shalulav or esrog tzichim liyas mishal lachem. That's one. B'shmini atzeres the lachem mahavahira also teaches us something. Shakabanas shmini atzeres mekabanas hayomim shaynim mekabanas hayomim akedim. That the carbon of the 8th day is different than the carbonas of the previous 7 days. So it means it's possible to observe this mitzvah and not realize that the mitzvah is lachem. For example, if a person will take a lulav nesser who doesn't belong to him, take it someone else's without permission, or steal from someone to do the mitzvah, he's not Yitzhak, so the Torah has to tell us lachem to prevent him from making a mistake. Or when it comes to Karbanos and Shmini Atzeres, where a person has to have in mind this is Hashem expressing and showing his love exclusively to me. If a person doesn't realize that, he'll bring the Karbanos without having in mind and recognizing that this is Hashem's personal love to me as a Yid. So he's not going to be observing the mitzvah the way it's supposed to be. But in the case of Sfiras Haimer, what are we preventing? What are we correcting by adding the word lachem? Aval b'mitzvah Sfiras Haimer, but by the mitzvah of Sfiras Haimer, lo yechayla liyos l'lo lachem. There's no other way of observing it to say that's not lachem. Sharei oifen kiyama mitzvah hu shetzarach lispers hayomim b'dibur. Every person has to do the mitzvah by verbally counting. So when you verbally count, what could the word lachem add? Yeah.
What comes to the thing for Shmini Atzeres? It's like preventing that you would think that it is for the non-Jews.
No, yeah. In other words, when it comes to Shmini Atzeres, it's not about something practical that would have been done wrong, but the kavanah would have been wrong. Hashem is saying, I want you to know today's day is exclusive. This is me. I want to show you my personal love for you. And if we don't recognize that, that means we're not recognizing what Hashem is really doing today. We're not recognizing the true meaning of this carbon. So it would be karbanos. What? The other day there was 70 karbanos. So that's when Hashem was sort of celebrating with all the nations of the world. And today Hashem said, I want to celebrate with you alone. So if we don't recognize that, we're not going to be observing that day and bringing the carbon that day properly.
Who brought the sevenfold?
What?
Who brought the sevenfold?
This was brought by the Kohanim. Yeah. In other words, these are called korbanos tzibur. There's certain korbanos that I bring as an individual, but machatas, they call them thank Hashem. But this is brought by the community, not by the Beis Hamikdash. The Hechar Chaim, we must say, shekashem shamila lachem, just like the word lachem, haksuva b'mitzvah lulav, b'shmini atzeres, just like in the other Yom Tov when it says lachem, mavhira es oifan hakarbonos. It makes it clear to us that we should understand how the carbon is brought, how the mitzvah of lulav and esrog is observed. It must be here the same thing. It must be that the word lachem, by the counting of the omer, is also implying something which makes it clear to us how to perform the mitzvah of Sfiras Omer. The Gemara actually says there is something. What is that? The Gemara Meres Shalachem Hushati Sfira LeCholechad VeEchad Cholechad VeEchad Chayev Lisper. Lachem means this obligation to count is upon you and whatnot. There's another counting which is not upon me. It's upon the Bezdin. What are we referring to? Next paragraph. Mitzvah Sfiras Omer, the counting of the Omer, Ein Edomer LeMitzvah Shel Minias Hashonim Shel Shmita V'Yovel. We're supposed to count the years. 7 years, every 7 years, a Shemitah is a sabbatical year. Every 50th year is called Yovel. And there's special halachas that apply to that year. Who's doing the counting? Is that a chiyuv that every individual has to count? Today is the first year of the 7th cycle. Today is the 2nd year, and today is the 7th year. No, this counting is for the Bezdin. When it says you should count 7 years, so it says Bezdin tzarich lisper shmita v'yovel. It's Bezdin that have to count the 7 years, and they have to count the 50th year. And that's why the Torah says, Lachem, Abba Mitzvah Sfiras Omer, you should call Echad Tzarech Lisper. It's not a counting that has to be done by the community, which is represented by the Bezdin, but each individual has to do their own counting. So I guess the question, he doesn't finish up with the question, but probably it means, let's understand why is it necessary? How come that counting is done by the Bezdin, and this counting every single individual has to do themselves? I guess it's interesting, this could be a little bit of a parallel to what the Rebbe told us about bringing Mashiach. That up until a certain point, the one who was mainly responsible for bringing Mashiach was the Nasi. But now every single individual has to do what they can to bring Mashiach. So I guess just like today, somebody would say, why do I have to count? Everybody in shul is counting. The Rabbanim are counting. So isn't that good enough? No. Every single individual has to count. And if I don't, I'm violating the Torah. So there are certain things that can be done by the community as a whole, and they represent every individual. And there's certain things the Torah says every individual has to do. Why? You have to understand, why does it say you should start counting the day after Shabbos, which means the day after the first day Yom Tov? Eze Kesher, what kind of connection is there between Shabbos with Sfiras Omer? And Be'emes Hashem Shabbos, the name Shabbos in this context really is not Shabbos, it's Yom Tov. Yes, Yom Tov is like Shabbos because you're also not supposed to do work. But that's not the term that you usually use for Yom Tov. And like I said, now the Rebbe adds another detail to the question. Not only why say the word Shabbos, but it's misleading. And that's why there was a whole group of people that they actually didn't observe the mitzvah properly because they said Shabbos means literally Shabbos. Why doesn't the Torah say it in the way that would just be smoother? In Mochras HaChag, the day after the Chag. Gam tzarech lahavin. Another question. Every time the Torah talks about bringing this carbon, which is called Eimer, Muzkar kol ha'eis inyan ha'anofer. Always mentions the lifting of the Omer, lifting it. Ad asher ha'Eimer atzma nikra Eimer ha'tanufa. The name of this carbon is called Eimer ha'tanufa, the Eimer which is lifted. What is the importance of the lifting, and why does it take up such an important part of the carbon that, the lifting was one of the things that you did, but the main thing is the carbon, which in this case is the barley that you bring. Another question, Mala Pirish Tmimes Tiyena. It should be 7 weeks, it should be complete. So this you can see again in the pasuk in the back over here, the what say was page 17.
Yeah.
So you see the pasuk, complete pasuk. This one is not on 17, it must be on the next page, 18. It starts in 17. Svartan Lachem Mochel Shabbos. You should count on the day after Pesach. When you bring the Omer, the wave offering, I told you why it's called wave, because you don't just bring it up, you also bring it out and bring it in, bring it up and bring it down. Like I said, it's like the lulav, this way, that way, up and down. And then it says, Sheva Shabbosis Tmimes, 7 complete weeks it should be. What's the meaning of Tmimes, complete? It already said it should be 7 weeks. What is being added by saying Tmimes, complete? Matzarach Eidufarish, Tmimes Tiyana, they should be complete. So this whole is basically questions. Kate Kitzer, this is the summary. Maksha, he asks in this part of the Maimon, Ma Mashmoas Hamila Lachem. What does Lachem imply? Muvayas Mashmoas Hamila Lachem, but he says we could understand the word Lachem by the Esrog and the Lulav. Shagavonim Lachem, it should belong to you. And we could understand the Pirush of Lachem by Shmini Atzeres and the Karbanis, that it means to say this carbon is exclusively for Yidden, versus the 7 days preceding it, which those Karbanis are for all the nations of the world. But here, what is the Kavanah? What is the implication of the word Lachem? Another question is, and he asks, how is it possible to do Sfira with not Lachem? And of course, he brings this idea that every single individual has to count. So why is that so significant? In other words, what does Lachem teach us? That it could be done without Lachem, and the Torah says it should be Lachem, you should count to you. But later he does, I'm surprised he doesn't bring it in the Kitzur, in the summary. Later he says there is a way of doing it without Lachem. If I wouldn't count, but the Bezdin would count. And Lachem means every individual should count. But I'm understanding the question is, why is it necessary that this counting should be different, that every individual has to count? Again, on the simple pshat level, we're keeping count. When is it going to be the 50th day from Pesach to know when is Shavuos? Because we know Shavuos is always the 50th day from Pesach. So why do we have to count? Why can't the Bezdin count? Just like they count the 7 years and like they count the 50th year. Not each individual, but the Bezdin counts. Also, what's the connection between Shabbos and Sfiras Omer? That in this case, when he wants to refer to Yontif, he uses the word Shabbos. So obviously there must be something specific about Shabbos and Sfiras Omer. What's the connection? And why is it also referred to as Omer Tenufa? Why do we always have to emphasize that it has to be lifted and waved? And what does it mean? Tmim is that it has to be complete. Once the Torah says 7 weeks, 7 weeks is 7 weeks, not 6 weeks. Now, if this question in the next In the next he starts to explain what Sfirisayim is in a certain spiritual avodah. And after we understand that, then we'll understand all these questions will fall into place. That when you understand it on a ruchnizik level, you'll see how all these things are necessary. To be continued. Okay.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
And sorry, you know, they want to set a thing. Okay. Well, there was a guy like